Joe Seivold, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. I appreciate your time. I know it's a crazy time for you and for everyone right now, but thank you for making it happen.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Jake. I'm glad to do it, to carve out some time in my day to share stories from a long time ago in a place that to some extent far away from my current confines and residence, but always great to be thinking about and whenever I can be back in Baltimore. Loved my time there. I've had a chance to be there recently, some this summer and fall, and it's also been terrific to be reconnected to Charm City in the land of pleasant living.
It was great to meet you in person a couple weeks ago, and after we met and kind of talked a little bit, I had the chance of watching your speech at the National Hall of Fame for Lacrosse, National Lacrosse Hall of Fame, which I really enjoyed, and I loved your message there because you were talking a lot about Baltimore and growing up here and kind of how lacrosse influenced you. It was like an ode to lacrosse as you described it. Maybe we can start off by talking about kind of how you got involved in lacrosse and what lacrosse meant to you growing up in Baltimore, where it's obviously so popular. It's like a national or regional sport here. It's, even more so than Philly, where I grew up. What was that like for you? And maybe what was some of the messages you tried to impart in that speech that you gave?
Yeah, well, so again, and this will only be relatable to a small portion of your audience, I imagine, because it was a rather long time ago, but there was a time in Baltimore where the Mount Washington Lacrosse Club was perhaps amongst the premier entertainment draws within the entire community. As I mentioned in the speech, clearly for sports fans, there was the Colts and the Orioles. And I would say, frankly, those two, Baltimore Bullets, I'm never sure sold many tickets down at the old Civic Center, now the Baltimore Arena, I think. But for so many people in Baltimore, it was the Mount Washington Lacrosse Club, the Wolfpack, that drew people's attention on Friday and Saturday nights all spring long. And I had the great fortune of growing up right there. My dad played for them. I mean, he started playing right out of college. I was born in '64. He was 5 years in with them by then and played through the early 70s and then became the coach. And so literally from the time I was old enough to walk, I was on those sidelines holding the old wooden stick and sort of picking up by osmosis, I think at first, the culture that is the game. And that culture within Baltimore, the culture of lacrosse, if you will, was what fed me and to some extent I guess. I had pretty unique circumstance. My dad was a high school coach at the Park School, and then played for the Wolfpack. And I'm growing up right there, right then. And to see what I would argue were the country's best players at the time. There was 2 or 3 really good clubs. One, the Long Island Athletic Club, coming down off the island, but certainly in the Baltimore area, it was the Wolfpack, and I got to be there for all of it. And so just kind of absorbed the game and all that surrounded it, the atmosphere, obviously the game itself. Became a student of the game as I was growing through that. And but beyond that, just the feeling of the game, right? Lacrosse in Baltimore is, I hope, still a feeling. The camaraderie, the relationships, just so much about it. I mean, my entire life was informed by it, consumed by it to some extent. But luckily for me and for us, I would argue at the time, without the rigors of the club lacrosse scene, the high school club lacrosse scene as it exists today. We played for our schools and we played recreationally before that, growing up, age 8, 9, 10, whatever, and played in the summer. But we didn't have the whole club scene that occurs now. So that's a unique and kind of forgotten time, frankly.
Yeah, that's one thing that I've been thinking about a lot, just in the lacrosse club scene around here now. It's always kind of do more tournaments, play for more teams. And you came up and became a great lacrosse player during a time when there weren't all those opportunities to play, this weekend and then that weekend. How do you think you got to where you got to in the world of lacrosse without kind of all of the, the club stuff? Like, were you just attracted to the game so much that you went out in your backyard and, you were spending so much time on your own, or were you getting guys out together to play with you? Like, how did you really develop your craft, your game, to become, such a renowned player in the Baltimore area and in the country?
Yeah. So two things. One, multi-sport, right? Like, first and foremost, I was lucky enough to play multiple sports in school and did not specialize. So I played, soccer and basketball all growing up, as well as lacrosse. Was able to wear the gray and blue for Gilman and play all three of those sports. Had great soccer teams. Unfortunately, was hurt for a couple of my basketball seasons, but was able to play basketball as well for the Hounds. And I think playing multiple sports, frankly, helped my lacrosse development. There's absolute crossover. You prevent burnout, and you just become a smarter player in all three sports, because you're seeing the game differently because you're playing different sports. So that's one. And then two, you don't get better in the back of a Volvo. I'm sorry. You get better with a stick and a wall and a ball. And that was, again, one of the unique experiences, at least for me, at Norris Field, where the Mount Washington Wolfpack used to play, that gigantic wall that holds up the Jones Falls Expressway. And I'm not even sure what's there now, if that field still exists, but that wall does, I'm sure, because the expressway is still there.
Yep.
And, going to practice 2 nights a week with my dad, and then games on Friday or Saturday or Sunday afternoons, I was just up against the wall, right? And that led to, of course, just all sorts of hard work in other venues, including my backyard. Grew up in northern Baltimore County, and it's funny, this summer we were there a bunch, and driving around, I see a lot of lacrosse goals in front or backyards up, north of Schwann Road, in that area of town where there's a little more green space and that opportunity. I had that space as well in Parkton, and had still exists there today, a barn, and the lacrosse goal sat in front of the barn. And so when I missed, I didn't have to chase the ball, which was great. The barn took a beating for sure. But, that was another thing I think that helped my game was, I think shooters get discouraged when they shoot and then have to chase their miss, right? And so I was lucky enough to not have to chase my misses, and I missed plenty. But as a result, I think of that, individual hard work on the skill sets, right? The shooting and the stick work, both hands, throwing and catching. Those were the two keys: multi-sports and just grinding work on stick work and shooting.
Yeah, I think that's so important, especially multi-sport. As a basketball player, that's one thing that, while I'm coaching here at Gilman, I try to get some of these guys to, even playing pickup basketball, it helps your lacrosse game so much. Same movements, picking, moving, cutting, all that stuff translates so well to the sport of lacrosse. Thinking about your experience at Gilman, who are some of the coaches that kind of played a hand in your development as an athlete in those three sports here when you were a student athlete at Gilman?
Yeah, so I was only there for 3 years, but I did meet some and had great guidance from some really special people, including Sherm Bristow as the basketball coach at the time, who was outstanding, and Coach Kumar on the soccer pitch, Mickey Fenzel in lacrosse. I would also say that I had a great foundation coming over from Park and from my rec experiences, particularly in soccer and lacrosse. And so great role models all the way through, be they coaches or the players, again, those older players that I was watching as I grew up. Just a lot of great guidance and a lot of great example setting, right? And I would also tell you that the teams themselves, like we were very close. Our soccer teams at Gilman, we were very good, and we were a close-knit group. I think that matters a lot, right? And when you're playing for your school, and I think that this is a huge difference. I mean, I'm in school leadership now, right? So I've seen this for my entire career. Playing for your school is different than playing in the club environment, because when you're playing in the club environment, to some extent, you're playing for yourself, right? I mean, the investment in time and money, frankly, is because of the outcome that's promised, right? I'm going to get better. I'm going to get a college scholarship, whatever. I would argue that it's more rare for a team to come together and truly be a team at the club level, be it, development academy soccer, this or whatever, club lacrosse team that, than for a school, for a middle school, much less a high school, right? So our teams at Gilman in all three sports, soccer, basketball, and absolutely lacrosse in the early 80s, I was also surrounded by really good teammates. And so great coaches for sure, and a lot of really talented and smart people playing next to me and with me. And I got better as a result of that as well.
Yeah, it seems like your class at Gilman, class of 82, was just really strong. A lot of good guys. I had the pleasure of meeting some of those guys last weekend or a couple weekends ago. But yeah, I think that's so important too. And I'm a huge advocate, I think, for playing for your school above the club, because you're so right that so much of the club scene is selfish. It's about the player wants to get to this place, and the parent wants the player to get to this place, and the coaches want to win for the club program. And I've had experiences coaching in all of these clubs around here, and I think there is a toxic element to it. Whereas for the school, there's learning, there's teaching, there's growth, there's camaraderie amongst the team. You're playing for your school. So yeah, I totally hear what you're saying there.
Yeah. And there's, you're never going to go back to the 20th reunion of the, 2002 Twisters.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's just not going to happen. And you're going to go back to the 20th reunion. I hope. I'm about to go back to the 40th reunion of the great class of 1982, Gilly Tech. And I'm excited to see all those people in April of 2022 at that event, 40 years later, right? Guys that I played one or more sports with, and guys that I just had great classes with, right? But never going to happen on the club side. So when you're missing soccer practice because you're at a fall club lacrosse tournament, or you don't play soccer because you're playing fall lacrosse, the bus rides, the wins, the losses, the grueling practices, the memorable mud-filled practices, whatever set of experiences that you could have shared with your high school teammates, those are gone because you're off doing your club thing. And then at some point that just all dries up, right? And I just think the lifelong indelible memories and experiences and lessons learned on that high school side cannot be replaced on the club side.
Thinking a little bit about your time at Gilman again, one thing that I find from doing this podcast and just talking to people is, like, people that watch are curious about how or what the school was like and some of the things that stand out to you when you were here in the 80s at Gilman. Like, what memories do you have in terms of your classes, kind of beyond the athletic fields, when you think back to Gilman? Like, what traditions or teachers or classes really stick out as memorable to you as a Greyhound?
Well, first thing, again, joining the community as a sophomore made that, jarring, and there were some great contrasts to Park School, to be fair, right? Dress code this and all boys that. It was an entirely different world from the 11 years that I'd come from as a pre-K through ninth grade student at Park. So coming to Gilman in 10th grade, I was certainly struck by some of the formality and sense of tradition, by the way, which I thought, actually had some really good and attractive components. And also, to be perfectly fair and honest, was struck by some of that differently because I had a different kind of upbringing, if you will. Yep. It wasn't inculcated in all of that from a young age, right? But those are sort of superficial in a way. Certainly the dress code, like whatever. I thought that it was an atmosphere of really high level of rigor in class, high expectations from the faculty, high expectations for behavior from the likes of Mr. Gamper and others who expected us to behave in a certain way, dress in a certain way, and respect the school and its traditions in a certain way. Obviously, all coming down from Reddy Finney, the legendary headmaster at the top of the chain there. But really strong academics. I was well prepared from my Park School experience for sure, but I was not let down. Things didn't get any easier, and really appreciated how I was pushed. I wound up dropping out of the math curriculum after pre-cal because that was like too much for me. I was more of a English history guy. Nick Schloter was an outstanding teacher who we had on that side of the academic equation, who really inspired me to frankly become a history major at UNC. So loved my time in the classroom there. The building was the building, right? I mean, schools these days are in facilities, arms races, and Gilman is a very different place physically, right, than it was. But what you really need in a school is great teachers, good books, and healthy, happy classmates, and you can make something happen out of virtually nothing. So we were happy with what we had, which wasn't nearly what the kids at Gilman have today.
Now your academic record, I mean, you're an academic All-American in college and an All-American on the field too, but your investment in the books and in studies, was that something that was intrinsic, or was that kind of at home? You were pushed pretty hard towards your academics, or where did that side of you come from? Because that's something that sticks out when you're reading about you, the academics, and even during the Hall of Fame speech, Willie Scroggs was talking about how you were such a strong student in college. I'm just kind of wondering where that came from.
Yeah, so I think at a young age, two things. One, I'm innately competitive, super competitive. And at Park, we had pretty small classes and other smart kids. And so I do remember as early as second or third grade, fighting to get the best score on the spelling test, right? Like, wanting to win the spelling quiz, right? So there was that drive to win, which was in the classroom and on the fields and courts. That's one. Two, my mom was a third grade teacher at Park, my third grade teacher at Park. And she certainly drove academics hard as a teacher, clearly. Right. And three, I guess just some sort of natural genetic, ability to perform at a high level in the classroom. I loved the middle school experience at Park was really impressive too. We were pushed hard in our writing and read some good books, and I came to Gilman, I think, well prepared to take on that next level and truly sort of embrace high school. I do remember not doing so well in AP Euro as a sophomore. I believe the teacher's name was Pletcher, and I guess I got hit in the face with my first AP as a sophomore, and may have needed to buckle down a little more than I did, but certainly straightened things out by my junior year, and really enjoyed that side of the equation. I think, look, the athletics is going to end. I mean, I should have learned to play the guitar because I could still be cool at the beach, right? But, my skills I've sort of invested in from ages 4 to, 26 or whatever, and it's sort of over. Yep. I became a lacrosse coach, but my playing days were over, right? Doing well in the classroom, I mean, that carries you for a lifetime, right? So, I was smart enough to figure that out, even if it was subconsciously, I think, at first, and rely on my brains as well as my wand. Yep.
Something I try to ask people who come on the podcast from Reddy Finney's time at Gilman as the headmaster, maybe are there any memories about him that stand out to you? I kind of started this podcast last year, and I called it the Path to Follow podcast after the documentary about his life. And he obviously had such a profound effect on Gilman and what Gilman is today. And I'm just curious, are there any stories or, when you think about him as a headmaster, anything that comes to mind for you?
Yeah, well, so now I'm a headmaster, right? And there's certainly things that I remember. I mean, I think I've been shaped to some extent by many of the headmasters that I remember, the Chuck Callahan and Parvin Sharpless from Park, and then Reddy Finney from Gilman for sure, right? His presence in the hallways and on campus and on the sidelines in particular was noticeable and impressive, right? So as a headmaster now, I mean, I try to model myself after that kind of level of full immersion and engagement in the school community. I'm sure you've heard that from others who have spoken of Mr. Finney. And again, I only knew him for 3 years. And as a 15-year-old, when I got to Gilman, my head was pretty much, I was just trying to fit in and figure it out. So it wasn't like, I was smart enough then to kind of fully absorb what he was bringing, but clearly the strength of his character and his presence, right, was noticeable. And I certainly felt it, and probably more so as I came out of my sophomoric stage and became a senior, right? But, and then of course I would argue that the class of 82 was not without its rebellious streak. And I was amongst that crowd too. And, so Reddy Finney wound up combing my hair on graduation day because he did not accept how long it was or the state it was in. And, thankfully he didn't put the shears to it, but he was going to make sure I was going to look as good as I could anyway, to some extent get back within the confines of what a Gilman guy was supposed to look like, because I'm not sure I ever fully did that or bought into that.
I love that. So coming out of high school, you went to UNC, and what led to that decision to go become a Tar Heel? I mean, I know Willie Scroggs, your coach, was probably a key influencer there, but you grew up in Baltimore around Hopkins and Maryland and, some of these great lacrosse schools. And I'm sure you had a choice because you're, such a great high school athlete of where you could go. What about UNC attracted you?
Well, so, I was recruited by a lot of schools, including Hopkins and Maryland. And again, and this is no slight to people from Gilman who go to Hopkins. It's a great institution. It's an unbelievable lacrosse program. There's no argument there, right? For me, it was a mile down the road. And I just had that sense. And again, my parents both grew up in Maryland and went to college in Maryland, Washington College, and worked in, so it wasn't like I had a lot of wanderlust from my upbringing. But I think there was something about leaving the state that mattered to me, at least subconsciously. And so Hopkins wasn't much in the equation after a little bit of that senior fall, just because I sort of wanted to leave town, right? Mm-hmm. And so then it was really down to UVA and UNC for me at the time. And I couldn't have gone wrong either way in so many ways. Two great institutions, obviously. UNC was on fire in the lacrosse world. And again, our younger listeners aren't going to remember any bit of that. But there was a time in the 60s and 70s where UNC lacrosse was a complete joke. And then came on the scene pretty quickly when Willie got down there and recruited an incredible class, the class of 83. Brought him out of Baltimore, brought him out of Long Island, brought him out of Central New York. And that combination of kids was really the backbone, in addition to the class of 82 and 81, that carried that team forward to 2 straight undefeated seasons in 81 and 82. And so here I am, a junior and senior lacrosse addicted, and for UNC to find any decent games, they're going to have to come to Baltimore, right? So they come play Hopkins, they come play Maryland, right? And so I got to see UNC in action, albeit on the road for them. And there was something really titillating about that program for sure. And ultimately just sort of made that call. Mm-hmm. I had great recruiting trips to both places, decided to go to UNC and don't regret it for a second.
What was Willie Scroggs like as a head coach? And what are some of maybe the coaching styles or tips that you took from playing for him into your own coaching career after college? Maybe I think about that all the time, about how, as a coach, I often think about some of the coaches that influenced me or some of the things that they did that I liked or some things that I don't like that they did. And, I maybe subconsciously enact that as a lacrosse coach or on the field myself. What was it about Willie Scroggs that struck you, or some things that you carried with you into your own career?
Yeah, so I coached for a long time after college, 3 different schools actually. And Willie was indelible, right? I played for him for 5 years. I wound up getting hurt in opening face-off of game 2 of my first senior year. So I decided to stay and play a 5th year. So I was around Willie for a long time. and fall and spring. I mean, we had fall lacrosse even back then. And I would say that the way he allowed us to play was super important, right? Like get out of the player's way to some extent, to some large extent, frankly. Some of the best lacrosse I remember playing was in McRaven Summer League or down at the Palm Beach Lacrosse Club right out of college in the Florida Lacrosse League. Club lacrosse, summer league lacrosse, where nobody's yelling at you and where you can just play, right? And the final score is going to be 17-16, but that's okay. And you might have thrown the ball away 3 times and missed the goal 10, but you got up and down and you were making plays and reading the field and having to react off of situations in the moment. It was completely unscripted, right? Yep. Well, UNC lacrosse was largely unscripted. So these days when you watch a college game and it's so scripted, and you're going to take 15, 20 seconds to get the D middies off and put the O middies on, and you're going to throw it down the side, and then you're going to, it just feels a lot more coach control. You're going to call timeout at the first sign of danger. And Willie let us play a little bit, let us play a lot. And I really appreciated that about him. Our practices were organized. At the same time, they were ultra competitive. And I adopted that mentality as well. Make sure that we have great intervals within a 2 or 3 hour practice. And each one's thoughtful and planned. And then you're promoting a lot of competition as much as you can, right? Not pregame, but most other days, trying to push kids to push each other and let the cream rise to the top, right? Yeah. Now, I will say, and only half in jest in case Willie ever hears this, that, the line, be a shooter, didn't really help me much because it doesn't instruct. I mean, when I miss the goal and he yells, be a shooter, my response would be, I'm trying, coach. But
Yep.
And I remember that's in my head a lot too, right? Because he yelled that to me quite a bit.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, you really don't see that anymore. It's hard to play. I feel like it's hard to play nowadays because, you have to win. You have to win, number one, but there are only 12 games on the schedule. So, like, every little action is scripted and micromanaged and, it's very different from what you're describing, even though your team obviously was very successful with that looser kind of run and gun, let you play a little bit mentality. Today, you can just watch and you see that guys are holding their stick a little bit tighter because you can't lose the ball in this possession, or you're going to get pulled if you throw that pass. It's very different from what you described, but it's interesting to think about that. So Joe, I'm very curious about how you got into the world of education kind of after college, and maybe what inspired you to start teaching and coaching. What were some of your first jobs teaching and coaching, and kind of where did that motivation come from?
Well, looking back, I think it was a super wise decision, right? It's easy to Monday morning quarterback it, but it's been a great life. I lucked into it, to be honest with you. I was a second semester senior in the Carolina locker room, the headmaster at Graham Eckey's Palm Beach Academy, which is where I wound up getting my first job. He had played at Carolina in the mid-'70s. He called the locker room. I think he talked to Dave Klarman and said, do you have any seniors that want to come down here and teach and coach? I'm leaving. And what Ted had done at Graham Eckey's Palm Beach Academy was build a good lacrosse team. And this is a school that had like 100 kids in it total, but he found 12 kids that loved the game, and he taught them the game for like 7 or 8 years, right? And so they were all like juniors and seniors, and now he was leaving. So he basically hired a lacrosse coach and hey, figure out what you can teach. So I was a coach first and became a history teacher because that was my major at Carolina. I had no classes in education at the time, very little training. Remember meeting with my mom. Again, she was a 3rd grade teacher and I was teaching high school history. So that was only semi-helpful. And next thing you know, I'm in Florida teaching and coaching. And again, coaching 3 sports. I actually coached girls volleyball my first year. It was a winter outdoor sport at Palm Beach Academy, as you might imagine. So boys soccer in the fall, girls volleyball in the winter, and boys lacrosse in the spring. And my volleyball career, that was it. I didn't do like year 2, but that idea of the teacher coach model, very important for schools like ours. My dad, again, was a soccer and lacrosse coach at Park. My mom, a third grade teacher at Park. So also in my blood. Independent school in my blood. Again, lucky enough to be a faculty brat at Park from age 4, right? So that's that sort of mix, if you will, of growing up in the world, having those role models, and getting lucky with that phone call that Ted Hill made to the Carolina lacrosse locker room. That's what kicked it off.
Yeah, it's funny. It's similar to my experience too, is because when you're coming out of college and you're an athlete and you do have some of those connections or some older guys that are working here and working at this place, it's easy to do that. But lacrosse, obviously, for you too, has always been in my life, and I was giving lacrosse lessons and I was working with kids, and I was thinking to myself, I kind of like doing this. It's fun to teach people the game and then go see them, play it on the field and take your advice. So a similar way, it almost fell into my lap or came across me, and I was like, why not? Why not teach and coach and, do something I love, which is English and lacrosse too, those two things combined. So it really, and then once you start doing it, I think just in my case, I've really enjoyed it so far. It's rewarding, fulfilling. And I guess that's kind of the similar story for you, is you got into it, you started coaching at that school in Florida and teaching, and never really, did you ever pursue something else or think about going into a different career? It's been fully education since then.
Yeah, pretty much. After that school was on its last legs, and I wound up moving back to the Triangle area of North Carolina. And I wrote a bunch of letters. This is a good lesson too, right? Like, this was way pre-internet, email, right? So I wrote letters and wrote to every private school in the Triangle area, Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill. And these guys, the girls, the headmasters, the assistant heads, the whoever was receiving these letters, I guess, throw them away or held them or whatever. Durham Academy held the letter. And then in that summer, they had a 6th grade social studies teacher whose husband got an opportunity to move to Greece for 3 years. And so she resigned her position. And next thing you know, Durham Academy called me. I'd written them in I don't know, February, right? Like, I had no idea, like, they kept the letter. And next thing you know, they call me over and sit down with the middle division director and the lacrosse coach. And next thing you know, I had the job, right? And that Durham Academy is an outstanding school, stellar and well-earned reputation, does great things with their kids and with the community. And for me to then fall into that lap, right, and be a part of the Durham Academy community was incredible. And so, again, lacrosse was a sort of a nascent sport. This was 1989, growing in North Carolina, but really on the front end of that. And for me to be able to take over that program fully in 1991, the head coach there, Kevin O'Connor, outstanding All-American lacrosse player from the University of Massachusetts, he was the 5th grade social studies teacher and varsity lacrosse coach. Kevin took me under his wing, and he and I co-coached for 2 years, and then I took over. He was ready to get out, and just ran with it, right? And then you're so busy. I was also coaching varsity soccer by then, 2 varsity sports. I had 2 kids, and I was teaching full time. 15 years goes by like that, right? So, I started a couple of lacrosse camps. I had a summer league that I ran at Durham Academy. I had a day camp I ran at Durham Academy, overnight camp that I ran out of North and South Carolina as well. Overnight team camp we did for a while. So I was just hustling, right? I mean, one of the things about being a teacher coach is, and again, a competitive former athlete, I guess, right, is just hustling, like not afraid to work hard, right?
Right. Yeah.
And hard.
I think about that too when when you're teaching, you bring up competition and you're naturally competitive. And at first I kind of thought this when I was teaching, like there's not that much of a competitive aspect to it, because, if you teach a really good class or not that day, there's no scoreboard. There's no one telling you like you did really well, or you could have done better. But naturally that competitive drive is like, if I teach a so-so class, the next day I'm going to want to do better. And then if I do a really good class that day, the next day you're going to want to one up that a little bit. So I think that almost plays a part into the position as well as the competition of it, or just the striving development of teaching.
Yeah, I totally agree. You got to be self-motivated, because you are in teaching. You're not going to get, there's no sales quotas. There's no board. They're not going to put you up against the other people in your department, right? And measure you against each other. It's really internally driven and motivated for sure. This intrinsic drive. And again, mission focused. I mean, I think this idea of the teacher coach in either realm, you're in service to others, right? I mean, it's not really about you, it's about helping people, kids in this case, be the best they can be it on the field or in the classroom. You're serving others, and that feels good too, right? So, it's interesting contradiction there. In some ways, juxtaposition anyway, between being driven, but being driven to help others.
Yeah.
Right. Because, there was no bonus check for me when I won a state championship at Durham Academy. Like,
right.
Okay, you won the championship. Great. You got a t-shirt, but we're going to do it again next year. Right. Like it's more about helping those kids. And in fact, because I was there for a long time, right. Like, and we won a bunch, and sort of by the late 90s, we had some of our best teams. And if they had a bad practice or if we were screwing up in the first half of some game that actually mattered, towards the end of the year, playoff game, even, it's like, fellas, I've done this. Like, this is your shot. I've got 5 championships. This is yours, man. Yep. You got to get into it, because I don't care. Like we've done this,
Right.
So,
right.
It's funny.
Now, as you were teaching and coaching in those early years, or really as your career progressed, was there any desire to become a headmaster? Was that in the plans at all, or were you pretty content with what you were doing in the classroom and on the field? And where did that next step to enter administration, when did that come into play?
So I would say that, again, time flies, right? And when you're raising a family and you're really busting it through the course of the year, coaching 2 varsity sports and then running camps in the summer, time flies, right? But you pick your head up and then you're 40 years old and it's like, okay, right? And so that happened for me and to me. I stopped coaching soccer in 2000, and that gave me a little headspace. And then I started to think about sort of, what am I going to do? At the same time, again, as a middle school teacher, middle school advisor, middle school curriculum coordinator, I was starting to think I knew more than my bosses. And at some point, you sort of have to put your money where your mouth is. One thing about our industry, you almost always have to move out to move up. I mean, right? It's really hard to go from being a teacher to being the middle school director.
Yeah.
Within the same school, because there's only one, and he or she is there, right? So, right. I started to get frustrated with the course of the 8 to 3 part of my day. The coaching was fine because I was in control of that. I wasn't in control of everything from 8 to 3, if you will. And I guess I started to think that, I was getting frustrated by that. And then I sort of realized, well, put up or shut up, right? Like, you can complain all day long, but you don't want to become a bitter old person within the industry, hanging on because of the benefits or whatever legacy you may have left. And so I just kind of leaned in and started to apply for some administrative jobs. I will say also that our younger son, Jordan, became an ice hockey player, weirdly, in Chapel Hill. The Carolina Hurricanes had come to the Triangle right when Jordan was, sort of 6-7 years old. So he starts learning to play hockey. And next thing you know, we're doing the whole travel hockey thing. I mean, his last league in North Carolina, he played for Team Carolina, and the league was like Dallas, Miami, DC, and Carolina. I mean, we would literally crazy, right?
Oh,
so,
wow.
Yeah. So I did exactly what earlier I preached not to do. But we didn't have high school hockey at Durham Academy, so he had to play travel hockey just to play hockey. So we started to think about that too, and say, you know what, maybe we should go somewhere that has hockey, right? Because he wound up being pretty good, and So those two things combined had me apply for some jobs at some places that were in hockey playing regions of the country, and just got pushed to go into administration, frankly, because I didn't want to be a grouchy old man complaining about my administrators.
So you went from Durham Academy to Minnesota to Blake School. What was that transition like for you from teaching and coaching to a more administrative role in a different part of the country, adjusting to a new school, and maybe some of the things you learned from that switch?
Yeah, so it was, I mean, hugely growthful, right? Again, just as leaving Baltimore and going to Carolina was for me anyway. We were very comfortable in Chapel Hill. I'd been there 20 years total, the 5 years at UNC, a 2-year hiatus in Florida, but then 15 at Durham Academy. So, you live a life in 20 years at Chapel Hill, and it's just a great place, right? And could have spent the rest of my life there, but something about pushing myself outside of that was really important. And I think a good life lesson for many. And so a huge stretch, just a part of the country I'd never been to. I would argue one of America's best kept secrets. I think Minneapolis is a really great town. It certainly was when I was there, 04 to 11. School administration is a different animal. And interestingly, Minnesota is definitely a blue state. And there was a bit of a sort of us, them mentality around the faculty there. I would say, I don't want to be pejorative about this, but more of a union mentality almost. Mm-hmm. And then the administration was seen as them, which is not at all how things were conducted for the majority of my time at Durham Academy. We were all trying to pull the oars in the same direction, right? And so that became an interesting eye opener for me too, sort of how to manage people that like naturally didn't trust you, not because of you, but because of your position, maybe, mm-hmm. right? And so I just tried to break down some of those barriers over my time there. I think team building, had been a strength of mine as a coach. And so that's a transferable skill in terms of leadership for sure. So worked hard to build trust and build team and remind everybody that we're actually there for the kids. And so, how many free periods you do or don't get in a row, doesn't matter to me. And so that's, it was a great time in my life. And I had some unbelievable professional mentors. John Gula, who's now the executive director of the E.E. Ford Foundation. He was the head of school there at the time, legendary headmaster with a storied independent school career before he got to Blake. Lisa Lyle was the assistant head. She went on to go and run Mary Institute St. Louis Country Day School for a long time. Now she's over in Switzerland running the school. Just impressive colleagues, an impressive community, and a heady challenge for me, given where I was at that time of my life, just to sort of have to reinvent myself as an administrator in a new part of the world.
So when you came down to Berkeley Prep, 2011, curious maybe what you took from your previous couple positions or 3 different areas, locations, and teaching and coaching, and then getting into administrations a little bit in Minnesota, to a role as the headmaster, maybe a couple steps up from where you were before, and maybe what are some surprises you found in that role at the beginning, and some things that maybe you didn't expect, but also some of the positives and some things you really like about running a school, being the head.
Yeah, well, I mean, so, in Minnesota, again, at Blake, I was the middle division director. So I was in charge of an entire division and 40 teachers, or 45, 300 plus kids. So it was a good experience for sure. It was very much a middle school experience. Although, again, Gula brought us in on school-wide decisions. So I had a very strong peek under the curtain of what it was like to run a pre-K through 12, because John was such a good and strong mentor. But there's nothing like actually being in the seat, right? And early on, I guess I would say that, well, there's 2 things that first-time heads just don't know much about, almost invariably, finances and fundraising, right? I mean, this is a $45 million operation. I have 280 employees. I mean, it's a business, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if this was a corporation, it'd be one of the largest in Tampa in some ways. But you never really understand that aspect until you're in the chair, right? And so working with our CFO here, got to learn a lot very quickly about the finances and how they work, and recurring expenses versus non-recurring expenses, and auxiliary revenue generation opportunities, summer camps, and then because I have an entrepreneurial spirit, that was all kind of exciting to me. Like, the idea of running a business that happens to be a school, because I ran those lacrosse camps for 20 years total. I mean, I was running them when I was in Minnesota. Started in 1992, probably folded it in 06. So whatever that is. No, later than 06. No, heck, I was doing that when I was here. The Dixie might have gone for 20 years easily, till 2012 or so, because we had some Berkeley kids that came. So running a business was not foreign, but it was a business that, I don't know, netted 20 grand in our best year, right? Not 40 million. But it was fun to kind of take over this school and learn about it as a business. Talk about, lifelong learning, and that opportunity really was cool. And I think I was ready for it, and it's been fun from that standpoint. And the other thing is the fundraising, right? I mean, one of the primary jobs of a good head of school, I think, is to secure the school's future through philanthropy, making sure that our school's biggest believers believe in us strongly enough to invest in our mission and invest in our futures. And so learning how to have conversations with donor prospects, parents, grandparents, alums, learning how to tell the Berkeley story, learning how to evoke that passion and that connection back, and to motivate people to join me in my quest to, again, support these kids as best we can, provide the best possible environment for them as they go through their days and years. Again, it's really fun work, but it was hard at the beginning because I'd never done it before.
Is there any, so for someone like me, maybe, who I think a little bit about that position, the headmaster position, and I've watched Henry Smythe, our headmaster, the past couple of years, and observed him and kind of see what he does. I mean, obviously I don't get to see behind the scenes, but for somebody who does have some curiosity or some interest in that pursuit of becoming a headmaster maybe one day, what are some, you mentioned the lacrosse camps, and that obviously had some valuable experience for you in terms of the financial side of things, but what do you think some of the biggest ways somebody can maybe get some experience or prepare for a role like a headmaster as a teacher or coach, or at least maybe think about what it might be like, in the future maybe?
Yeah, well, so the first thing I would say to that is to lean into leadership opportunities, working with other adults, right? One of the things that can happen over a career, and again, I was a full-time teacher for 17 years, right? So I speak from vast experience that you wind up working with kids all day, right? All year, mm-hmm. whether in the classroom or then on the field, and then in the summer at the camps, but you're mostly working with other kids, learning to lead adults is the other side of the equation, right? School administrators, much more often lead other adults, right? And so that's the big divide there.
Yeah. Going
from trying to get 20 kids to do something you want them to do, to try to get 20 adults to do something you want to do, right? And so, volunteering for committees, serving in various ways to serve the school as part of, whatever, it's a curriculum development committee, this, or a self-study accreditation committee, that, any chances that you have to sit with other adults and work together on something, or even, lead a conversation or conversations around something towards some end, could be an ad hoc initiative, right? But to try to get somebody to appoint you, or that sort of opportunity, that's huge. It'd be rare to jump straight from teacher to headmaster. So at some point, people aspiring to be a headmaster have got to go ahead and make the jump into administration. Doesn't mean you got to go be a headmaster, but if you take on a job as a dean of students in the upper division, or lower division director, or anywhere in between, at least now, not so much dean of students, you're still directing kids, but assistant, whatever, this or that, assistant middle division director, assistant upper division director. Now you're working more with adults. You've crossed over into administration. And from there, you sort of see like how that fits. That's generally been the way the pattern almost always goes, unless you're working at a really small school. And then there's all sorts of other things, right? I mean, NEIS and various state accrediting agencies. Ames, I'm probably still in Maryland, right?
Yep.
I'm sure that there's opportunities within, I know there is within NEIS to get a peek under the curtain. And then again, most importantly for me, I took the leap into administration, took over the middle school at Blake, and then I had a headmaster who was interested in my leadership development. I think that's the key, right? Is that once you're sitting next to a school leader, what you hope for is that school leader teaches you the ropes and shows you what's going on. And even if it's just by listening as he or she thinks out loud about the decision-making process they're going through, you're there and you're learning, you're soaking that up. And again, as you mentioned with Willie, for example, with any coach, some of it you learn like what not to do, right? Or at least wouldn't fit your own style. But I had that really awesome opportunity to have some great mentors in Lisa and John, and sort of set me on a strong course.
That's pretty awesome. That's great advice. Berkeley Prep, I've never been there. When you're selling Berkeley Prep or just talking to people about Berkeley Prep and where you are, what are some of the kind of points that you offer about what separates Berkeley from other schools in Tampa?
Yeah, well, most recently we just dominated Arch Manning and Isidore Newman on national TV last Friday night.
Oh, you did well. That's awesome.
49-24. But no, I think look, and I've been at some great schools ever since I was 4 years old, right? As we've covered, this place has an unbelievably strong school spirit, sense of positivity, optimism. There's great passion and commitment here for each other and this community. It's just a really happy place. I mean, authentically so. The kids are not beat down. I mean, we work them hard and we have great college outcomes. You can see it on the website. I mean, we do as well as about any in terms of national merit semifinalists this or college placements that. But the kids are still smiling, and they're smiling in September and they're smiling in February. And I think that's a great testament to the support they're getting from their faculty, the atmosphere. Berkeley puts people in the world who make a positive difference is kind of our vision statement. We are very service oriented here. We have a food pantry across the street that we took over about 9 months ago, and now we're serving food, providing food to under-resourced folk in the town and country area. We run a whole summer program called the Berkeley Academy for under-resourced kids that might experience deep summer learning loss if it weren't for our 6-week free summer program. And then we also meet the kids on Saturdays once a month during the course of the year. We hired a college counselor this year just to help those Berkeley Academy kids get to college. So our service efforts are terrific. I think this pervasive sense of being responsible for something bigger than oneself, right? This sense of social responsibility is huge. And then internally, I would argue that we've pushed big on helping each child be known and nurtured, and to the extent that we can affect it well. So this idea of known, nurtured, and well. I mean, we're a big school, 1,400 kids, pre-K through 12, but we want each child to understand conspicuously that there are adults here, more than one, as well as other students that care deeply for them, that want to nurture their development, want them to feel like they're being forwarded and supported by this community of others around each of them. And then ultimately, we're there to support them and frankly, forever. One of the things I say all the time, especially to our seniors, graduation week or whatever, is, your school forever. I mean, we're not finished with them when they cross the graduation stage. We have a very strong alumni relations department, and we want these kids to feel just wholly invited to call on us. They want to transfer colleges. They need help finding a first job. They want to move back to Tampa, need connections in commercial real estate, this or whatever that. Like, I think our alumni network is pretty strong, and we want to be there for our students, again, forever.
Wow. Sounds like an awesome place. A lot of similar overlaps, I think, with Gilman a little bit when you're talking about service and knowing the boy, knowing the student. A A lot of those things come to mind here too a little bit. So Joe, maybe one more question, if that's all right with you.
Sure.
Coming to the end of the hour here, but one thing that I like to do on the podcast is for every guest, I ask them if they have a book recommendation or something that they've been reading or just in their life has affected them. I'm an English teacher, so I love getting recommendations all the time. And I know you're a history guy, so is there a history book or something that you've read over your life that has made an impact on you and that you think about a lot?
Well, I do love reading histories, and recently have been reading a history of the world in 6 classes. It's a book that really covers the history of the world, talking about different beverages and how they've affected the world. Beer, wine, coffee, tea, soda. Really interesting a lens with which to understand human history through the lens of these 6 glasses, if you will. Funny, when you mentioned this before, and I was thinking about it, I'm going to plug a fellow Gilman alum. I don't know if you've read this, but Whose Game Is It Anyway? This is a Gilman guy from the class of 1985. He's up at Harvard now. And, back to where we started this conversation, I read that book when it came out, talking about whose game is it, right? Like parents and the over intrusion, I think, and parents taking way too much credit or putting way too much emphasis on their kids' kind of outcomes in sports, the whole club scene, and really trying to get back for the coach in me and the coach in all of us, just reminding ourselves that the game is really for the kids, right?
Yeah.
So Whose Game Is It Anyway? It was a great book that influenced my coaching greatly. And my buddy, who was there at the Hall of Fame induction ceremony the other week, sent me this. He claimed that I was one of his heroes, and Admiral McRaven, who's spent time here in Tampa at MacDill Air Force Base. The hero code's been a recent favorite of mine. He mailed it to me, and congratulations for the Hall of Fame induction. And I've been enjoying that most recently. But we got a gigantic library full of books, and one of the costs, I will tell you, of school administration is you don't get a chance to read as much. I advocate reading all the time with our kids, especially our youngest Buccaneers at the 5th grade moving up ceremony every year. I tell the kids, as they go into summer, read. It was one of the great things that I had in my life. Summers in Parkton, Maryland. I mean, I shot lacrosse balls against the barn and read books, right? And all summer, every summer for a long time. And now, of course, I'm like working way too much. And so don't get to read as much for pleasure as I once did. Still try to carve out some time in the summer. I think it's important for all of us, teachers, administrators. So, I've recently been able to work out in my arrangement with my board of trustees, the opportunity to be away in July. And we have a place in Northern Ontario, Canada, where as a child, I used to read a lot as well. And can't wait to get back there this summer after 2 years of being banned from crossing the border. Get back to some great reading in July.
Awesome. Those are 3 great recommendations. I'm going to have to check those out. McRaven, he's the Make Your Bed speech and book, and he's one of my favorites. I've seen that book around, so I'm going to pick that up. And then the other one, just perfect, coming full circle in this conversation about that's something that's been on my mind a lot is, parents and kids and the club scene, and just I describe it as an arms race because everybody's doing it. Everyone's playing for this club team. You feel like your kid has to play in it. And then I coach, and a lot of it's really bad, but I don't know what the solution is or the way around some of that toxicity in the sport and in coaching is, but it's interesting to think about. So thank you for those.
It really is. The last thing I'll pontificate about that is that the thing about it is it's self-perpetuating because very few people will ever admit they were wrong. Parents, right? So you invest thousands of hours and tens of thousands of dollars, starting in 5th grade in some sort of, year-round sport activity. But very few people show up at the country club when their kid's a sophomore and admit that was all a waste of time. Right. It's like, so now you're just feeding that next crop because the crop moves through and then they're gone. But now you got that next group of 5th graders. and they're going to buy in. And then whatever happens, you know, and you got the one or two shining examples. Somebody actually got a half ride to Maryland or whatever, but you know, the majority of them don't wind up panning out, if you will, and the aspirations that the parents had when the kid was in 7th grade, but nobody ever admits that.
I wonder why, though, because I feel like you would feel that way if you put all this money and effort into getting your son to play at Virginia, and then it doesn't pan out because, I don't know, the club program didn't work, or he didn't really take to the sport and practice enough on his own. And for whatever reason, I mean, I wonder why parents don't really acknowledge that or come to terms with that and share that with others. I guess it's part of the investment.
Right. Well, my theory is because in the end, the kid just wasn't that good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what you'd have to say. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very true. That's very true. Well, Joe, thank you so much for coming on today. I appreciate your time. I love the conversation. It's great getting to know you a little bit, and thank you very much.
My great pleasure. Go Greyhounds.
Go Greyhounds. Thank you.